te hurihanga ahu rangi me te taio. I'm just going to start with a quick karakia, if that's okay. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kei mā kinakina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Thank you, councillors, and welcome to the very first Environment and Climate Change Committee. I'll be putting up a bit more of what Pippa and I are thinking on this committee and our goals and what we're going to do with you all in February for a workshop, and then we'll be having a more fuller committee in March. So today is more procedural. We've got some really important things on the agenda, but it'll be a more straightforward, shorter agenda than we will be used to for the rest of the term. So thank you all for being here. And first of all, I'm just going to, with your support, quickly acknowledge the Government and Parliament for the passing of the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Amendment Act. I just thought it was important to start off acknowledging the Government and Parliament as a whole for their leadership and congratulate them for the bipartisan approach to the most important, in my opinion, issue for our city and Aotearoa. So I'm not sure we need a vote on that, but I just wanted to acknowledge Parliament for that. So if anyone has anything to say, but cool. Thank you. Next up, we have apologies. I've got apologies for lateness from Councillor Walker, Councillor Henderson. I've got apologies on council business from Councillor Casey, Councillor Filipina, Councillor Bartley. They're at the Tupuna Maunga Authority Hui. And do I have any other apologies? Cool. Can I have a mover for those apologies? Councillor Cooper. And a seconder, Councillor Young. Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you. Can I have a vote on that? All in favour? Aye. Aye. Any declarations of interest, councillors? No. Our confirmation of the minutes. This is the first meeting, so there is no minutes. There are no petitions. There is no public input. There is no local board input we have received. I'm just going to move to extraordinary items. Oh, we haven't handed that out. Yesterday there was a release of the government spoke about the waste levy, and we thought it was appropriate that we should have a say on that as a council. So we thought the most appropriate way would be to appoint a few of us to do that work, because it will be before there are any committees. The submissions close, I think, February the 3rd, and so there will not be a time that we can do it together, so we'll have to sort of do that by email, and if you'll support the rest of us. So I just need to, first of all, move the extraordinary item. Can I have a mover for that? Oh, do we have to move it forward?
Oh no, so you take this first.
Okay, cool. So we just, this is the president of business?
No, this is just to accept.
Oh, okay, cool. So mover?
Yep.
Oh, the mayor, seconder, deputy chair, Pippa Coombe. All those in favour that we're just moving the extraordinary item?
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Cool. And now I will move a motion of precedence of business. And the reason I'm doing that is just because the second major item on this committee must go to confidential, so I'd prefer this item was moved to before both of the major items on the committee. Otherwise we have to go into confidential and then out, and that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So we'll just pass around, or you may have already got it. So I'll give you a little time to read it. So we're not actually debating the merit of the submission at this point. We're just trying to make sure we have our say on that. So I'll just give you a couple minutes to read the agenda paper. Carol, would you like to come to the table? And Sophie, both of you just want to introduce yourselves and your roles for councillors who may or may not know.
Kia ora tātou, ko Parul Takuingua, and I'm the General Manager for Waste Solutions.
Morena Grank, and I'm the Team Leader for Strategic Planning and Waste Solutions.
And if maybe for councillors, could you just explain why we're here today and why this has actually come to the table with very little notice?
As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, that the government has put out a consultation document reflecting on the waste levy that we have in this country. It currently stands at $10 per tonne, and they are wanting to look at increasing that and also expanding it as well. So the proposal stands to move it from 10 to about, I think, $50 to $60 by middle of 2023. So we are wanting to consider it in its fullest in terms of the implications that it will have on us and the opportunities it presents for us. It is also wanting to, as I said, expand, which means the current levy sits on just the landfills, and it is wanting to see what other fills where it could be put on so that there is no migration of waste from landfills, just to avoid the landfill levy. So they are looking at it in a holistic way. For us to be able to consider it, we do need a little bit of time. It is quite tight because they are wanting feedback by the 3rd of Feb. And as you mentioned, there are no committee meetings that we can bring it back to. So if you appoint a group that we can work with and then have you sign it off, we will be able to make the submission in time. It is quite critical for us to make the submission. As part of the waste plan, we've always said we are wanting to promote this because we do see a lot of opportunities, but we want to be able to give it the facts and the background to it in our submission.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your, first day, and all for your welcome. My question is just around understanding, trying to unintended consequences about the diversion of out of landfill into other sites. I'm assuming you might be meaning managed sites, that type of thing. So could we just elaborate on that a little bit? Are you saying in the paper you'd like to outline in our submission that that's a concern, we'd like that potential loophole shut?
As I understand, and we haven't gone into the detail of the document as yet because it came out yesterday, but they are proposing a levy on managed fills and monofills as well. So they have taken that into consideration, that it is a good idea to expand it out so that it does not, that unintended consequence does not happen. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā kouroa. I really welcome this proposal by the government because it's very long overdue, and I think it's recognised as an anomaly with the levy. But I just was curious to know, in the when we debated the waste management and minimisation plan, I thought council took a leadership position on what the levy should be set at. Do we actually have a number that we have advocated for previously, or that's come through through the work that's been done?
Yes, we do, and that actually sits quite high. It is at about 140, and that's based on experience overseas. But it does also talk about the importance of ramping it up steadily, and the government indicating that it needs to have a stepped approach through it. So this would be a step in the right direction.
Councillor Newman.
Difficult to discuss this without discussing some of the issues that we had yesterday. But with the government proposing the increase in the landfill levy, it raises the issue of what to do with a number of products, disposable products that are no longer required by households. But it doesn't yet resolve the issue of what sort of opportunities there are for an alternate market. So what understanding do you have of the government's need to ensure that any capital that they invest in new technologies for handling recycling is complemented by the operating funding necessary? Because it seems to me that inherent to any future recycling scheme will be an enormous level of subsidies, and I don't think that that's fair to have those subsidies paid for by ratepayers.
The government is also looking at setting up, so they already have a national resource recovery working group, and they are looking at developing an infrastructure plan that is for the country, which will look at how do we actually spend the money that will be generated through the levy. So it will be directed towards where is it that you need for that very reason, to say how do you actually build that capacity within the country to be able to divert. Because if you can't do anything with the product, then the levy will be a big disincentive. So, and I think as part of the submission that we will work on, we will bring those aspects out.
Do you have any idea of the scale of funding that would be required for? I mean, we just seem like a really tiny market. There just doesn't seem to be the sort of volume to be able to make this a commercially viable market. There just seems to be like a permanent level of subsidy that's going to need to be provided. And if that's the case, then that's the case. But I don't want that to be paid for by ratepayers.
Point taken, and I think that there are different markets for different products. I mean, it'll depend on what we're talking about. Fiber, for example, will require a big investment. Plastics might be different, so those are things that we can reflect on, and I can provide that information if needed.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton.
My question was similar, really, was the impact on the contract that we're negotiating now. And in terms of household rubbish and who would we that cost? So it says here, just briefly looking at this document, that it can be passed on to the council can pass the cost on. But is there any movement? I'm not sure how it works now within the contract that you have. That is, and I can't even remember how long the contract is that is being negotiated now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the contracts that we are letting out now are for 10 years, so they are 7 plus 3 plus actually 2 as well. But we do in the contract accommodate for any changes, legislative changes that might come through, and for variation in price. So because we were looking at a partnership approach with our suppliers, we're wanting to acknowledge anything that comes which is not within their control, we will make sure that they are not being done for in that space. And in terms of the impact on the resident, we will be able to provide more information once we've done the analysis and where it sits. If we just look at high-level figures, if you look at a $10 per ton levy, and if you have a 120-litre bin, I think if I look at the tag scheme, it's 16 cents of the price of the tag. So that's the kind of quantum that we're talking about.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome this. Look, I appreciate that there wasn't time to put a climate change impact statement on this, but in our submission, I think we do need to stress the climate change benefits. Since we made our earlier submission on the waste levy, and I, like Councillor Coombe, would like that to be our base and start from there, but take into account that we have now signed up to a climate emergency and we're out for consultation and closing in on our action framework. So they are two big moves on our part, and then of course the government, as the Chair's reminded us at the outset, has signed up to the Zero Carbon Act. So there's not a lot of reference to the climate benefits of making this move currently, and I think we need to reinforce that. That's probably my statement there. I think also we are going to see, I know that there's going to be a response from the construction sector, the housing sector, and they're going to be chorusing this is going to add cost, which is sort of the New Zealand condition, very rarely looking at the opportunity, always looking at what's immediately looming in the negative. And I think it would be really helpful to grab some of the examples from municipalities in New Zealand, around the world, and show that whole new industries have been spawned and prosperity has been spawned out of increasing levies quite substantially. And there's lots of evidence in that. And there is no excuse for us hiding behind us being a
Councillor-
so-called small market.
Councillor Darby, we're just on questions. Is it just going to
Yeah,
forming the question?
that
Yeah.
that is. Look, I think what I'm saying here is I'm asking for these things to be explored in the submission. You know, the small market of a Pacific Island nation can make an industry out of something, and we can't. That's just ridiculous. So some of those things for me, because are really, really important. And probably the other thing is to signal that the 2023 date is just an intermediate date, and it needs to kick on from $60 in 2023. My feedback.
Points noted.
Councillor Cooper, question.
No, it wasn't close.
Oh.
I was trying to understand where we were at, and I didn't put my hand up.
Okay.
If we're having questions, because I wasn't sure if there's questions or not, so I'd like to find out how to speak.
Anybody else have questions? Councillor Walker, welcome.
Sure. So, just in respect of the impact of the levy, and we've obviously known about a proposed increase for some time now because the government signalled it, have we done any modelling on the impact of various levy scenarios, increase in 20, 30, 40, 50, going up to the Australian amounts and possibly beyond?
Yes, we have, and that was part of the report, excuse me, that we had put to the ministry earlier as well, and that's where the $140 value came from as well. So we do have that information, but given that this proposal has more detailed information in terms of what they are proposing with the other fields as well, so we'll do a holistic submission in that context and have that presented to government again.
The other question just goes to where the money goes. So as it stands now, we only get part of it, I think. What is it, 50%? Are there other scenarios that we've looked at where we might get 70, 80%, and we might be better placed to determine that, and I'm reflecting on the localism provisions or suggestions that local government New Zealand is making. So have we considered that?
That can be part of the submission in terms of wanting to have the local government share of the funding coming back to us. But as far as I'm aware, they are looking at whether that extra money can be invested into infrastructure that goes for the nation rather than specific councils. So I guess as part of the working group that we get nominated today, we could work on those aspects and then look at what do we submit to them.
Sure. I understand that. I think the reason I'm asking that, and it goes to my question, is that Auckland is by far a way different to any other council. I mean, the scale we've got at this point and into the future means that what happens in Auckland is most constructive in terms of reducing waste.
Thank you. Got a few more speakers, but I would just move what's there. Remember, we are looking at just appointing the working group to put a submission forward, and basically on the plans and things we have already approved as a council. So I would just welcome Member Wilcox. You had a question?
Oh, sorry, I haven't sat in this seat for a while. Yeah. This is just a straight out question. What will the engagement with Māori be regarding providing some information for us in this submission?
Given the tight timeframes around this, we are requesting a member of the IMSB to be part of the political working group. In the past, when we consulted on the waste plan, we have had feedback, so we can incorporate that work that we've done into the submission as well, which was in 2018.
Thank you. I assume Mayor Goff is not a question?
No.
Okay. So we'll just have last question, Councillor Walker.
And that is why the working group is limited to the chair and deputy chair. For example, if I look at myself, I led out the council's waste strategy in the first term. I've got an abiding interest in this area. I'd certainly put my hand up to contribute. So I just toss that in. So just asking a question.
Yeah, I mean, I have personally no problem with that. It's just around whether we can get the time to swiftly get this out, where it'll be a short time frame over the holiday period. So if
Happy
you're
to
going to
make
be
myself available at
available?
any time you want.
I would prefer to keep it tight, but if Councillor Walker, you really want to be,
I was also on the waste panel.
yep, no, that's fine. And yep, so we'll just have brief comments now, and remember this is focused on setting up the working group. This is not.
Look, I think all of us have got an interest in this, but I understand that you have to keep it tight. Perhaps you can indicate a way in which we can feed material, all of us feed material into your working group. That might be the best way to deal with it, because I'd like to feed something in just like Councillor Walker would. So either, you can meet on a one-to-one, or we can put something in writing for you.
It might be more efficient for some of us to actually be on the panel. I mean, I was on the waste panel, for example. So
I've made the call. If the seconder is happy with that, to add Wayne at this point, but I would prefer not to increase it, and I will be asking for input. Wayne's shown an interest, and no drama for me. And Councillor Mulholland.
Thanks. Thank you, and I welcome this committee, and congratulations to you, Richard and Pippa. May I make a recommendation, please, in terms of consideration where the statement is 2 local board members? My recommendation is 1 chair from the west and 1 chair from the south, instead of just putting 2 local board members. And I say that just because of the area of influence. A question, if that's possible, could be answered, please.
It's probably more a political answer, but I would prefer to just leave that up to the chair's group to choose whichever members or chairs they would like to do that. So I don't think I think we're trying to make sure we include local boards in a way. It is only 2, but I'd like to leave that up to the chairs forum to pick their own way to do that. Is that, I don't know who can answer that question, but.
My question was chairs, not members, just so as that they are chairs because they're appointed by the board. So I think chairs would be the most appropriate people if you were going to appoint, and they decide, yes, but chairs, not just members, if that's possible.
I'm happy to put chairs, but still it is up to the local board chairs forum to decide. They have appointed deputies and other members before to things, so I'm happy to put chairs this time, but I would usually prefer the local boards choose how they make that up.
Good, I accept that. Thank you.
The seconder, Pippa. The question
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my comment in relation to A is why would you, sounds a bit trite, but why would you have 2 local board members representing it all? I mean, local boards ought to be able to make their own submissions on this, and I would assume a number of them will anyway, but I would have thought that actually what we're talking about here is a levy that has a significant potential impact on a regional budget, and I am just not quite sure, given that will need to be taken at the governing body, if there are decisions and implications budget-wise, why you would not be just working this out as a committee of people sitting around this table at the IMSB and leaving it up to local boards to contribute their own submissions separately.
I might need officer why it's proposed for 2 local board chairs. I think usually we would have the ability to receive all the local board feedback, and we may or may not be this time. So, and I'm not sure if this is a new way of working. Does someone have clarity on the normal?
Kia ora, I'm Lucy Hawcroft. I'm the Stakeholder Manager for Infrastructure and Environmental Services. Council is moving towards trying to involve local board members more in political working groups on submissions. And so this is probably a process you're going to see more often on significant submissions.
Thank you, Lucy. We would. It's. I'm in favour of leaving it at this point in time. I don't think there is time to receive local board feedback. I'm going to try and move on. This is largely about setting up a political working group to work on a submission. So if there is, I'm going to stop questions now, if that's okay. Or
Your position on the involvement of Councillor Walker then, I thought I heard you said you were happy to have him as part of that working group. I'm assuming that's the case.
Yes, that doesn't require an amendment. I asked.
Well, I'm just looking at the resolutions. That's all.
Yeah. So sorry, I had asked if it was okay with the seconder to put Councillor Walker in, and apologies. It's going to show now. I was happy. Is that a question, Councillor Darby? Yep.
I appreciate Councillor Mulholland's contribution on changing members to chairs. What that does, though, I'm very aware of a member of the Rodney Local Board who was very instrumental in the Safe Speeds campaign in the rural areas. That would not give her the opportunity to carry through her leadership in that area. And I think it does need to be kept open, and it's not for us to determine who amongst all the 140 odd local board members is the best candidate, and it may not be a chair.
At this stage, due to Councillor Mulholland's feedback, I took and I've decided that I'd prefer chairs this time. That's fine. I think largely the Chairs Forum will have to choose in that moment next week when they meet. We're on a tight time frame. I don't believe going out to all local boards to ask for their input will be a quick way to do it, but I'm really keen for future times to leave it open for the Chairs Forum to do it. But I've already made that call this time round, and I think it just might be a bit more seamless with the short time frame. Cool. So just on speaking, is there another question? No? Okay, so we're on to Councillor Cooper to... Oh, Simpson. Yep.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Look, you're the guinea pig for a new process, I think. So with respect, I'm just going to check this process. So for me, it's sort of a little bit irrelevant for me who the political working party is at all, because what it should be is those people should represent a view of others and listen to the local boards. I see point 13 of the bit that I've just read, paper that I've just read, says a memo will go out for all local boards. I'm taking that process will now mean that it will go to all local boards. All local boards will either resolve or provide feedback. That will come in, it will go to the political working party, which will then bring it back to this forum. Is that correct?
We do not have time to bring it back to any forum.
Sorry, yes, you're right. In this particular case, it won't come through, but that's how you will filter the information. And so the sort of the final submission will be based on all that feedback. So actually, from a governing body perspective, or an environment and whatever this committee is called, Climate Change Committee, we talk to the three people who are going to be talking, and the local boards talk amongst themselves and submit in by that way. Great clarification. Thanks.
Yeah, it's not going to be a perfect process, but I personally believe we need to lead on what we've already passed as a council before, use that and grow from there. So it will largely be around the ideas we've democratically supported previously, such as the waste levy in our plan prior to now. Speaking turns, Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I strongly support endorsing the government's moves. I accept the point that the levy might be higher. It's $200 in Australia, and we're talking about raising it from 10 to 60. But sometimes you need to do things progressively, and this levy would raise $250 million by the time it gets to $60, I think, a tonne. And that does two things in my mind. One, we have to create a disincentive for people just to put stuff into waste. And we have to create a disincentive to create waste in the first place. In the last 10 years, we've put 30 million tonnes into waste, and that's a 50% increase. So are we moving in the right direction? No, we're moving absolutely in the wrong direction. If you look at what we recover at the moment, it's 35% of our waste. Australia, by comparison, I hate using positive examples from Australia where they're doing better than New Zealand, but they bloody well are. They are recovering 55%. We have one of the worst rates of waste in the developed world. So can we sit here and do nothing? The answer is clearly no, we have to act. When you put a waste levy on, does somebody have to pay the price? Equally clearly, yes. What will that price be? The price will be, in the first instance, with the extra $10, about 33 cents. And I think maybe a broad calculation, by the time we get to the end of the first phase of this process, it might be 80 or 90 cents. That's a bit of a guess. But it's not going to break anybody's bank, but it is going to send the right message. And, you know, first of all, if you don't have that disincentive there, then people will continue in the same bad habits that some have. Secondly, it's not just increasing the levy, but it's broadening the levy. Only 20% of the waste in Auckland is from households, 80% is from the commercial sector. And the commercial sector have to come to the party, and they are. I mean, Councillor Darby and Charlie here to my left, the Deputy Mayor, went to Fletcher's where they're doing prefabrication. Out of a whole house, they have one garbage bag of waste. Compare that to the huge skip bins that builders have on their property. So they can do it if they're incentivised to do it. So I think that is really important. Is this a silver bullet? No, it isn't. It's got to be alongside things like container deposit schemes. It needs to be alongside product stewardship, resource recovery centres, food scrap separation, which we're doing, and reducing packaging. So it's one part of the jigsaw puzzle. Do New Zealanders want this? Well, according to a Ministry of Education survey that they did last year, this was listed by New Zealanders in the survey as one of the 3 top issues facing the environment. So there is a public will to do that. There is a role model that if we do it, there will be less waste going to be buried and more waste being recycled. And that's the outcome that everybody in this room, I hope, wants. So I would hope that we act consistently with what this governing body has already decided in the past, which is to support an increase in the waste levy. I've heard lots of members around this table talk about supporting that, and consistent with what the overwhelming majority of people, Councillor Coombe on the Local Government New Zealand have endorsed. This is a Local Government New Zealand policy, and I did an interview this morning and Duncan Grana was saying, the government's doing this. And I thought, well, let's not blame the government for what we've asked the government to do. And we have asked the government to do this, and they have responded cautiously. And I understand caution, that's not a bad thing in politics, but it is a distinct move in the right direction. And I think our submission should strongly endorse that, and at the same time say, this is part of a jigsaw puzzle of things that have to be done. And when it comes to where that money is spent, we know that the markets are closing very rapidly for sending our recycling offshore. Yes, we have problems of scale in this country, but can we leave it to another country to deal with our waste? No, we have to do it ourselves. And a lot of this money, I hope, would be going towards developing an onshore recycling process that befits our claim to be 100% pure, which we're not, but it's a good aspiration. So strongly endorse what the government proposal is, and I think our submission should reflect that.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And another councillor who's been quite involved and interested in this, Councillor Cooper.
I think starting at the 140 that we already had might be, I don't really support that. And the reason I don't is because I know how much work the Minister's done on this and the background. And I think we have to, as a council, think about our people. This is a really good transition. And if we, it's quite a significant increase, but in terms of a trailer load, it's $5. It's a small increase on the bag, but we've got to be able to signal that people do have to pay. And we subsidise a lot of things: public transport, libraries, sports fields, pools, a whole lot of things. And a lot of us don't use them, and a lot of us do. But the reality is we all put rubbish out. And I think in the end we have to be educated a bit more that the generators need to pay, and we're all the generators. And but if we can slowly bring that in, it's an educative process, and we're still having to do that in the south already with the bags. So we don't want to hit people too hard, but I think we have to signal that it needs to go up. It's inadequate, but also with the construction industry, that's a critical issue as well. They have the majority of the waste to landfill, and we're not really dealing with that as well as we could. So I think this is a very good start. I do think that the public, our public, would feel quite scared if we really went hard on we've got to do 140 or 150. I think we've got to be really mindful of that. But it is well long overdue that it's increased. So I support that, and I'm happy to just put a bit of input in. If you're circulating in a bit, I'm not going away. But I do think we've been leaders in a lot of ways, and listening to the radio this morning, a lot of comments, well, Auckland Council are doing this, Auckland Council are starting that. We've actually been quite pioneers in some ways for New Zealand, though we've been a bit behind as a country. I think it's really worthwhile, but we can't be saying that the public shouldn't have to bear the cost, because that's actually not the way we've been going. We've been talking about making sure people who pollute pay, but we can't be as harsh. You can't start off really harsh. You've got to just gently put that in there. The other thing I think too is when people say, oh, there'll be more dumping, we need some education, or maybe in the submission we have been doing education, but there's education for people. People say poor people are disadvantaged. Yes, they are. However, what are we doing, and what more do we need to do to educate people that buying the junk from the warehouse that lasts 6 months, and then it's like the $20 toaster, it's in the dump within 6 months sometimes. And sometimes it's about how are we supporting people to go, well, actually buy the $100 toaster that will last you 10 years. And, you know, that's 10 less toasters in the dump. And I know it sounds a funny little kind of example, but that's it. We're buying a lot of junk, and we're importing a lot of junk that isn't sustainable. And I think that's the other end of it, because that's the waste stream. And are we addressing that as best we can? Because some of that isn't even reusable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly wanted to add my voice to enthusiastically support the proposals from the government here to raise the charge. It corrects a historic problem, I would say, that's really unacceptable. As we've talked about a lot, climate change is going to force us to change our behaviour in really drastic ways. And this to me is not even that drastic. I think it's just a very good start. And I also just want to add my voice to Councillor Walker's suggestion here. I think this is a good example of where localism should be applied, and actually Auckland Council should have more share of the revenue here.
Kia ora, Councillor Henderson. So there are no other speakers? Oh.
Kia ora, thank you. Just a seconder, I would like to add my voice to supporting this motion. I think the Mayor covered the context really well, and the facts and figures about where we're at now and where we need to go. I just would like to also add, in terms of how I see our submission framing up, is that as a council, we do have an aspirational goal of zero waste by 2040. So that is very much the starting point for our submission. And within that, we've already politically agreed, I'm pretty sure it was a very strong support around the council for the aim of a levy of 140 per tonne. Even if we support, we can say now this is a good start. I think there's a lot of context that we can provide in our submission. So this is, I do absolutely tautoko the government's move on this levy, which is long overdue, and I think we can have a very robust submission that draws on all of that background work that does go back to the first term, where we set a very aspirational goal, and there's been a really consistent path all the way through. So I welcome this opportunity for us to provide feedback, and thank you for the work of getting this on the agenda so quickly as an extraordinary item. And so I'd like to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. Councillor Walker.
Speak to this very briefly. So totally supportive. It's been coming for a long time. I'm not familiar with the research that the officers have already done around this issue, but my concern would be that if we don't have complete research, by all means, let's get a submission in by this date, but let's continue the information so it's flowing to the government, because I don't think that the decision-making process is going to be fast, and this is a moving feast. So hopefully it's escalating, and we need to have a comprehensive case that points to ongoing escalation.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair, and great to see you in that seat as well. I just wanted to add my voice of cautious support for heading in this direction. I really liked the context. I enjoyed watching the Mayor go head-to-head with Duncan and Mark Richardson this morning. It was fun to watch. Well done, Mr. Mayor. I think my caution is because I completely agree. I know what we're trying to do. I get a real sense, and I thank the officers for the work that they've done. But often when we start pulling aside the figures and we start talking about, well, this is what it'll cost, like $5 or 33 cents in the week, that doesn't sound like a lot, because it isn't a lot. But as a whole, it is still a lot for poorer communities. And so that's why I'm cautiously optimistic and supportive, because I think we need to take these steps. Those in impoverished conditions are feeling the brunt of climate change, and a lot of us are the ones out south who are buying the cheap toasters that have been referred to, and that's often because that's all we have at the time. So I think it's a really good move. I'm really supportive, and as you said yesterday in our workshop, I probably shouldn't quote you from a workshop, but the fact that you are advancing the idea that we've got to keep those in poorer communities at the centre of our considerations, and so I'm really supportive at this stage. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Collins. Thank you. And just briefly from me, thanks first to all the staff and everyone who ensured this got here very quickly. This is not the process that I would normally prefer. I would prefer we had a draft of a submission and we can all debate it together, but there is no way to do that. So I think it's important that we do speak up on such an important issue. I will ensure that we are including as much of the feedback we've heard today, and feel free to send me any other feedback you'd like. We do need to think about all communities when we're discussing this issue and the effects on them. I personally see over time the point of this levy is not to raise the money and charge more, it's to try our best to divert as much waste as possible and get people really thinking about how we can not create the waste to begin with. Because as we know, when we are dumping whatever we're dumping into the whenua, it stays there forever. As we've seen down the west coast in Te Waipounamu, the landfill came out of the land again, and we have massive issues there. I think we'll ensure that we stick to what we've already passed democratically as much as we can. So around the fact we've asked for a waste levy, what we've said around a climate emergency, because this is a climate issue, what we're saying around the water strategy, because this is a water quality issue. We know leaching and other issues from landfill contribute to that. It's a natural environment issue. It's a land issue. The more waste we have, the more land we're going to have to take up for waste. So I'm pretty confident that we can ensure something that is not too out of the bounds of what we're expecting around this table, and we do need to bring the community with us, but it is those things we've already pushed for, and the community, right across the community, is asking us to act on climate change, on natural environment, on water quality, and zero waste, this is all part of that. So thank you all, and we will hopefully put together a really good submission. So thank you. Yeah, we probably need to move that. All in favour? Aye. Anyone opposed? Perfect. We now move on to, where's my notes? Item 8. And we will have Sophie, Adam and Fran. Oh, Gail. If everyone could introduce themselves and their what their role is within Auckland Council, so everyone knows who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a senior grants advisor for the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage Grant.
Kia ora koutou, ko Gaiola Guvi toko ingoa. I'm the General Manager of Environmental Services, which for the new elected members around the table is the department in council that is responsible for council's biodiversity, biosecurity, including Kāri dieback, education for sustainability and climate change action at the household level.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sophie Hayway toko ingoa, and I'm the Group Manager, that's right, isn't it? Still Group Managers of Sustainability Initiatives, which is the education and climate action part of what Gail just mentioned.
Good, thank you for that. And we will just get, is it Sophie, or you'll just go through the...
I was going to make a few words.
Oh.
I'm just here to briefly provide some context on Auckland Council use of grants for environmental improvements. I just thought it'd be useful before we spend most of the session talking about this year's Regional Environment Natural Heritage Grant. Firstly, starting with the history, this grant goes back to Auckland Regional Council. So it was picked up and brought into the amalgamated Auckland Council. So it's been going for quite a few years. Originally, it was just strictly biodiversity and water quality. So it was originally set up to provide funding for private landowners to do things like fencing and planting along streams. So about 5 years ago, we expanded it to include climate change and sustainability. We didn't change the title. It was always the Regional Environment Natural Heritage Grant, but it does now include climate change and sustainability outcomes, which you will have seen in the paper. And obviously with the biodiversity, there's the healthy waters connection as well. At the same time, it's about 5 or 6 years ago now, we also extended it to allow for multi-year funding. It's since the targeted rate passed a year ago also changed, in that you will have seen we've been able to support the original business as usual funding for the grant with a greater amount of funding through the targeted rate. But with that as well, and this is targeted rate funding now only, we've also got a separate grant which we call the Community and Conservation Coordination Fund, which has been set up to support embedded community members coordinating what they do with their natural environment outcomes. So given that, from our perspective, although it's an extremely effective mechanism to allocate public sector money, we're just also aware that it's growing quite organically. So we're doing a review of the funding. Again, the targeted rate allows us to sit back and reassess some of these things. So I just wanted to signal that we are doing that review, and we'll come back to this table if there are any significant changes that require governance overview based on that review. So that review will take account of things like cost to serve, composite reporting, so we know we're getting maximum leverage from this grant investment, and also a bit more joined upness with other investment grants that come in from organisations like Foundation North, GIFT, Department of Conservation, obviously, so it's a bit more joined up across the region. So I just wanted to provide that history and signal that review before I pass on to Sophie to talk through this year's granting outcomes.
Thank you, Gail. Now, I would prefer if we went through the presentation before questions, unless, Councillor Newman, you want to ask something specific prior to the presentation?
Well, I didn't have questions on the presentation. I mean, the information's been sent out. I'm quite happy with the officer's recommendations on the grants. So what I was going to do, I mean, I'm relaxed to just go to a vote now, but others might want to triage this application by application, is to just move the recommendation set out under this item.
Thank you both for that. I'd prefer you go through the presentation, especially for new councillors, the public, anyone watching, but it's a very, very important area and some fantastic work. So I'll just let you go through the presentation and then we'll have questions.
That could have been my shortest appearance. Congratulations, Richard, as well. It's exciting to be here as a person who's devoted my life to environment and climate change, to be at this committee, your first one. Thank you. Just a bit of a recap on the program, as Gail's talked to you about the history. So we cover 4 categories: conservation, sustainable living, healthy waters, and kaitiakitanga. Just a little recap of some of the projects that you've agreed to fund over the last 12 months. This is the Project Light Club, which supports sports clubs with the reduction of carbon emissions from their centres. We have a whole range of conservation projects. This includes bat roosting sites in the Hurnua Ranges, bat radio tracking in the Waitakere Ranges, ecological enhancement of the Awaroa Wetland Reserve, and the Tread Lightly Caravan project. Also the Matuku link infrastructure requirements from the Matuku Reserve Trust, and the Habitat Te Henga project, which Forest and Bird run. This is a Healthy Waters program run by Sustainable Coastlines called Love Your Coast. And in the Kaitiakitanga, this is an example of the Papatuanuku Kokiri Marae Sustainability Champions Parawehi project. So some really cool stuff there that you've funded. So this is just the process that we've been through. I'm not going to go into any detail on that, other than we've done an awful lot. There's been a lot of support for community groups to get their applications together and screening applications. There's been a panel workshop. A lot of staff have been engaged in assessing these from a range of aspects. All of them have had a kaitiakitanga lens put on them, and my team have supported that. Here we are today in the green at decision-making time. Applicants will be informed as soon as we're able, and after this meeting, projects will be implemented from January to January next year. And we get an accountability report from each of these projects in February, so we'll be receiving this year's ones in February coming, and we will come back to you with that report of how they've gone. So just really quickly on the applications received, it's all in the report, which I'm sure you've read. There was about an equal amount of both number and request for funding from those applications. It shows you how we weight it. These weightings are done individually, and then the moderation happens, so we sort of, have a look at them all in the whole. Applications that are recommended for approval, it follows a similar line, so about the same amount approved as there were applications in that area, so it all seems pretty fair and consistent. There were a total of 69 applications. We always receive way too many applications than we can fund. Unfortunately, there's some amazing projects that don't get funding, but the total amount funded, including multi-year grants, is nearly $1 million, so that's an incredible amount of investment into the natural environment. That includes, as Gail said, funding, nearly half of that comes from the natural environment targeted rate, which you've also approved. And this is a bit of a geographical distribution of the applications. It's a little bit hard because a lot of the projects are regional, and so it's a little bit hard to assign them to a local board area, but this sort of gives you a bit of a spread of those applications. Happy to take questions.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. With the Healthy Waters projects, is that separate from the Healthy Waters targeted rate, water quality targeted rate projects? This is sort of an overlap?
Yeah, so there is no overlap. So the Healthy Waters and the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage will focus on fencing projects on properties with significant ecological areas and biodiversity focus areas, in addition to other kinds of promotional work to improve the quality of water. But sometimes when the project could be funded from the water quality targeted rate, we do divert some of the projects from RENA internally and do that and advise the applicants, or fund them on the same decision and maybe get the money from another WBS code, but for this one, this didn't happen. We moved 3 applicants earlier at that time to the Healthy Waters route. Yeah.
Thank you. Still on questions, Councillor Coombe, Deputy Chair Coombe.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. It's absolutely wonderful to see what the applicants are doing with the grants and what's happening around the motu. I went along with the Deputy Mayor. We were at the Conservation Awards not that long ago, and there was just such a celebration and particularly amazing support for the targeted rate that has allowed this fund to be increased. And this does lead to my question around whether Gail, you did mention about the establishment of a separate fund in addition to this. Sorry, I didn't catch the name of it, but I'm just curious to know, is there a need for a fund that's more directed very clearly towards climate action, because that's obviously becoming a very big area of concern, and it might not be so clear for applicants that this can be about climate action, and that could expand into a whole range of things. And also, is it the fund that you talked about that's been established that allows for groups to apply for funding for the resources that they need to actually do the applications, which I know are very intensive and can take a lot of time. So you always get this catch-22 where groups want to be out doing fantastic stuff out in the field, but then they can't get the funding for the admin people because it doesn't fit the criteria. So there's sort of 2 parts to that question.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. There are 2 parts to that question. I'll answer the part around the embedded community coordination that we're funding first. So the name of that fund is the Community Coordination Fund, and it was set up as a separate part funded by the targeted rate to achieve exactly what you've just summarised. The feedback that we get from the community groups is great that there's an opportunity to apply for public funding, but the public funding is set up to work for projects that have a beginning, middle and end, work effectively for that type of community work, but not fund the sort of requirement that the administration, the coordination, the people who will be, able to apply for the applications. So, or the funding. So the Community Coordination Fund is specifically set up. I think we've got about 17 community coordinators now around the region, and those community coordinators are also employed. There's a large number of what we call umbrella groups now set up in the community space, like putting together, for example, the Northwest Wildlink project, the Kaipatiki linked up landscape scale work. So those coordinators bring those projects together and coordinate as part of the community. So they're community members that we're paying in those roles. So that's that fund, supported by the targeted rate, Community Coordination Fund. In terms of your second question, the climate change, absolutely. When I referred back to when we changed the scope of the Environment Natural Heritage Grant to what it is before you now, it works well, except it's actually quite challenging to, in one place, determine the merits of planting along a stream front, for example, with a high biodiversity value area, and a community group like Project Lightfoot that is out supporting carbon footprint reduction through sports clubs. So what we've found is we're in a situation where now that we've got multiple outcomes, we've got calibration methods for putting those together so that we can effectively rank them. But there is absolutely, I think, really strong rationale for having separate funding that is focused on climate change, sustainability, and supporting ongoing funding for biodiversity and water quality.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Good report. Totally support the grants. Not an issue. The question or the issue that I just want to raise is just around the strategic approach that we're taking. And if I just delve into that a bit, as it goes to the Community Coordination Fund, totally support that. That is having a phenomenal impact. And as you point out, part of that approach strategically is around encouraging umbrella groups so that instead of a situation where we have lots of individual groups approaching us for this and that, the encouragement is that within a geographical area, that could be Upper Harbour, could be Kaipatiki, could be wherever, the groups actually collaborate and they work things through and they're sharing. It's much more economical, it's much more tactical. So that's really great. Just picking up on the issue that Councillor Coombe raises around climate change, totally endorse that. Having said that, I led out the Council's climate action strategy in a previous term. I had a lot of liaison with a lot of groups, and the demands in that area are absolutely massive. Absolutely massive. So if we are going to do something, it should not be just a token approach. Otherwise, that will simply be
We're just going to
laughed at.
As a question, please.
So,
Councillor Walker.
I thought we were beyond questions now. Have we finished the questions? Okay. Okay. Well, I'll then pick up my my thread after questions.
Still on questions. Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. Just a couple of questions. I note that just in the last slide with applications and the support people get to do applications, I was just wondering if that was if after a year, that seemed to be my interpretation, that's when they provide an accountability report. Is there ongoing communication with them between that time?
Yeah, do you want to do that?
So the projects can either be 1 year projects or multi-year projects up to 3 years. So we usually give applicants a call every 3 months to check out what's going on. And after the reporting period, they would submit an accountability report. The subject matter experts were reviewing. And then we acquit the projects and send thank you letters and request photos and stuff. And we also do forward invitations to attend events if the applicants would request.
Thank you. Just a supplementary to that, Chair, is I know that you send the decline letter and people are working with you for applications. Is there much work that goes on afterwards as far as those who've had their applications declined as to how they might get it to a position where it would have a better chance of being accepted?
Yeah, so usually we would send them the decline letters, and all the letters will indicate that they are encouraged to contact us. And sometimes when we decline something, we would offer another way to fund it. So we would direct them directly to local boards or maybe some other council funding sources. Sometimes council could fund it through other avenues. So we try to work with them and try to keep everyone as happy as possible within the funding that we have.
So I just want to add to that. Sometimes people most of the applicants only get a part of what they've asked for, and they need support to top that up as well. My team, particularly in the sustainable living area, we work a lot with the corporate sector in funding, things that we can't quite fund, and so we'll work with them on projects that contribute to what we're have an objective to draw and deliver. We'll bring them in and support them and see how we can add that into the packages we build. Yeah.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, my question just is around the natural environment targeted rate and the pretty much doubling plus of the allocation into this fund. So what I still am looking for is by adding more, because I thought the natural environment targeted rate was to sort of bring forward a work program to, deliver stuff in that space. So I'm just understanding how this fits into the wider picture, and that's the bit that's missing. So we're taking pretty much $500,000 or 440 out of that fund. Not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just trying to see, how do I know that's a good thing, because everything else that's left to do other things with is still going to meet the objective. That's just a bit that's missing from this report from my perspective. Can you give me some context around that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I think probably the most important perspective in terms of answering that question is recognising that 75% of Auckland's native biodiversity is located on private land. So what we do as an entity in terms of how we manage our regional and our local park estate is important. But we have 75% of the precious environmental taonga that we're mandated to restore on private land. So the grants process gives us a way of equitably and transparently allocating public money to private landowners from a biodiversity perspective, and then obviously the community groups that are receiving this funding. So I think that the fact that this year we've made a call to supplement the funding is essentially a immediate response, recognising the extent of biodiversity that's on private land. But I think, as I mentioned, Councillor Simpson, given the scale of that grant, we're looking now, the targeted rate has given us that chance to step back and review exactly how we best get the ecological outcomes we need through the targeted rate, and the points that have come up as well with respect to investing in ecological conservation outcomes and council's investment in climate change sustainability. So that's why we're doing a review. But for now, the decision was made that this is a equitable, transparent and very effective way of making sure that we deploy some of that targeted rate to the high biodiversity value areas. And Sophie mentioned the work that we do with community groups. We actually now increasingly, because we have maps, we now understand across the region where the really special places are, and now we can go to those private land owners and sort of tap them on the shoulder and say, look, you know, there's this opportunity to receive some public investment through a grant. And of course, the other thing that's important with respect to these grants is their incredibly effective leverage. So we estimate around a factor of 5 to 1 return for our investment if you look across at what the private landowners or the community groups are also contributing in kind or through corporate support, as Sophie mentioned. So the current situation is really good idea now, and that's what we're doing this year, and that's what we did last year as well, but we're reviewing it.
Can I have a supplementary to Barry, please? So Barry, when we would get a report back on the environmental targeted rate for an annual or quarterly report back, you will incorporate the results from the public, this section of the funding in that whole picture, correct? Yeah.
Correct, we'll do that.
And yeah, just on that as more of a financial thing, and Gail did mention it, when we do invest, the little bit we do invest usually gets 5 times the amount, with volunteer time, other financial input that council, if we were doing, would have to fund that 5 times over. So, and we always acknowledge that there is no way we can do this through operations with the size. Member Wilcox.
Yep. I've got a series of questions here. So I'm just going to the Māori impact statement. 42 applications recommended for funding were identified. Are these the ones we have in front of us now? Are they the 42? So my question is, they were evaluated as having that by the internal subject matter expert. Is that correct? This is an expert, aren't we? We're talking about a real expert. That's the second question.
Where am I? Yes, so we had I had a person in my team run through it, and she was mentored by a senior person in our relationship management team who oversaw her work. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can have another fly and talk about that. I suppose my question is, so how are we measuring if there's a scoring rate of 10 for Māori outcomes and Māori kaupapa, how are we measuring that, and how are we going to get that feedback from these groups that we've given the grant to?
So this year we added an additional emphasis on the evaluation of Maori outcomes. So there is a main outcome, which is Kaitiakitanga, where the project is mainly delivering on Kaitiakitanga outcome, and the Maori outcomes, the contribution towards them in particular is measured in all projects. So we usually, when we meet with the applicants, we gave them an additional set of information on how to engage and how to deliver a Maori outcome. We work to connect them with the iwi hapu if they're doing some work on the land, to make sure they are working with them sustainably and they are involved in the decision making, especially in the conservation projects, and also getting more of the message out and planting days and incorporating te reo in any items that we support. So generally it will be reviewed against the Council Maori Outcomes document, and then we will score it according to that.
Just to add, so there's 69 applications, all of which are quite detailed, and it's a very big piece of work to go through. So every single application has a response on their Kaitiakitanga section, and so we'll be able to provide that back to all applicants about how they could improve on that as well.
Yeah, that's fine. I suppose I'm just concerned that it becomes a desktop exercise and not engagement, because you can't have kaitiakitanga without a kaitiaki, and you can't have the reo without a kaikorero. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're not doing this as a desktop exercise and saying, yeah, we did this and these are Māori outcomes. And the reason for that is, I mean, everybody wants clean water, everybody wants the creek to look good. That's not a Māori outcome, that's a New Zealand outcome. So I just want to make sure that we're not desktoping this Māori outcome kaupapa.
There's a separate section for specific Maori outcomes that isn't related to the environmental outcome, so it's a special section they have to respond to. Actually, the process that we went around with Kaitiakitanga was designed by a senior person in our relationship management team, so that was designed by her, and we've used her suggestions. We can probably take a bit more detail offline if you want to explore that.
And thank you, Member Wilcox. I am keen, and Deputy Chair Coombe has talked about how going into next year, how we can look at and make sure the these grant applications are the way we want it, and moving forward we're going to improve, especially on the Māori outcomes, and then also things like climate change impact and things that's I think we're doing amazing work, but I think we can do better, and I'd love for your input on that, Member Wilcox. Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. One was similar to Glenn's, and it was around how we can get some more content around not just the Māori impact statement, but the assessment. So I guess the assessment is about us understanding what you've just explained, but also impact statements, so they're meaningful, you know, if that's possible. And my other question just goes back to what Gail was talking to, just in terms of the review, and what prompts that for me is looking at the spread of applications across the region, looking at the applications themselves and knowing that they are also applying to local boards for funding. So is your review going to have a look at what is the cost of processing grants at a regional level? And is there some efficiencies to be gained by perhaps allocating the funding down to the local board level? There's quite an intensive cost in processing grants, Is that part of your review, to look at the efficiencies and the costs?
We're in the process of scoping that review, so I can't answer that question definitively for now. But I think in terms of regional, local delineation, there's quite a lot of work put into A, supporting the applicants, and B, reviewing the applications to make sure that anything that is funded through this targeted rate RENA grant is of regional significance. So ideally, we have regionally significant initiatives funded here, and then that allows then the local boards to, in the knowledge of what's being funded at the regional level, make informed decisions about what they can then supplement at that more local level. But it's a really good point, and I think we'll certainly look at, we already make sure that there's no overlap, obviously, but that still is work that needs to be refined. You know, we have a fairly good understanding, but it could, those processes for checking who's funding what, even across the organisation, you know, you've got 8 different departments supporting community-led conservation. So we're setting up systems to make sure, although we've got some understanding and we certainly check there's no duplication, we definitely need a more joined up picture that includes the regional and the local investment. So it could absolutely be part of that review.
Yeah, if I may add, so all the grants are administered through the grants team. So what happens is we are the same people who also do the local board grants. So once we receive an application, we have a program that helps us. So we check if there are any double dipping or redundancies or any stuff like that. And sometimes we could also arrange for a project, some of it to be funded by local board funding and some through the regional. So we do that, and it's actually the same advisors from our team who handle both things. So we kind of have a bird view vision of what's going on. We also check with the non-contestable, so we know, I mean, where the funding is exactly going, and we're sure there are no redundancies.
Thank you. And I had a question sort of around that, and I know I mentioned it yesterday in the pre-agenda run-through. Is my concern that, and it's great for the North, that we have 27 applications being funded, but the South has 15. My concern is, and I know I only brought it up yesterday, so there's more work to do, but how we can ensure that the areas that we're blessed, like in the North, with a lot of natural native bush and parks and things that, and groups already, you know, protecting that. If the focus on kaitiakitanga, sometimes the South does not have, and it's clear, street trees even, we don't have the things to protect as much as we do in the North. So how do we make sure we look at these applications or work with groups in the South to ensure they're applying more or can be looked at as a bit broader than just protecting what we already have, because there may be ways that we can increase. So in 10 years' time, a council like this can be protecting things in the South that have grown from this fund now, I guess, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, so the team spend a lot of time trying to boost that equity across the region, and I think they do a really good job of targeting their support and their workshops in the areas that are lower, so in the South and in the West. I think the fund that Gail mentioned, the Community Coordinator Fund, CCF, but I'll try not to use it. I think that really helps. So if we can be directing their support as well into those groups, to help them get those applications. As you said yesterday, the North are really well organised. They put in very good, high quality applications. We need to just make sure that we're supporting the South and West in the same way.
Good, thank you. Are you speaking or question?
Just a quick question,
Oh, yeah, sure.
if I may. Sorry, just be indulged with a follow-up question. Councillor Simpson's comment just reminded me of something I wanted to ask about the value for money that we get from the grants. And at paragraph 36, it does say what's leveraged by groups. So in terms of the total pool, so all of the applications, if they were all funded, we would get a
7.5.
Almost, over $7 million worth of contribution to the projects from the group's contribution. So I just wanted to confirm that we're going to pull out the number of the actual funded applications so that when the chair goes out publicly about these grants, that's another good news story that we can highlight to say that, we've got this funding from the natural environment targeted rate. That's brilliant. Everybody's contributing. Look what we're getting for it. And on top of that, we're able to leverage it. I think it's about 3 to 1. So 2 to 1, maybe. If I do my quick sum. So just want to clarify we're going to do that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And we did go back and do the sums. The total applicant contribution for the approved projects is 5,178,000. So quite a lot of return, as Gail said, about a 5 to 1 return. Now the difference with that is that was what they requested in funding. Because we only part fund those projects, there will be a downscaling of that based on what they can achieve with the funding they get. So we won't know that until they are notified of what they have. And then they reassess their projects and what they can achieve with that money, and we'll definitely know when we get those reports back at the end of the year. So we know that from what they requested, the approved projects return about a 1 to 5, but with that downscaling, we'll be able to give them a better accurate figure in February after.
Thank you. And now we move on to speaking. Councillor Newman, did you want to lead off as the mover, or are you happy?
No, I just want to vote these through.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Walker, you wanted to finish your speaking turn?
Sure. So I was raising the issue of the need for a strategic approach as it goes across this. And quite obviously part of that approach goes to the community coordination, and that's really great. And I'm assuming that if we've got areas where we don't have sufficient communication and activity, and that could be down south, that we'll be actively cultivating that. I'm also entirely supportive, and I pick up on the relationship with local boards. From speaking to local boards, that relationship is not always clear on their part, and it's not always clear to us on our part. So it would be really good to have some strategic overview over that. In addition to that, it would be useful just to have some strategic overview and reporting on how we're going across the region and the relationship of the targeted rates, these various mechanisms and so on. And I'm mindful back in the 70s and the 80s when, for example, there was a Rodney Ecological Areas study that was quite comprehensive, and at that point the then Conservator Graham Campbell described the loss of vegetation as akin to an ice age because we were experiencing considerable loss at that point. And I'm also mindful that across the private space, and you mentioned that, we are experiencing considerable loss of mature trees across Auckland. It has been huge, and we have as yet had little if any reporting to us on that. So I'm really asking, through you, Mr. Chair, for a strategic approach on how we're doing, what we're doing going forward, and that picks up on some of the comments that Councillor Simpson raised around value for money and so on. I think we need that.
I can confirm that Deputy Chair Coombe and I definitely support your direction and looking at that, so thank you. And I'll just, if there's anyone else, no? Cool. I'll just briefly comment, thank you very much for all the work. I know this is a mammoth task of getting through the information and scoring everyone and checking out the applications and helping people with applications. I want to thank everyone who applied, and hopefully those who didn't quite make it, they can be encouraged to come back and figure out a way forward to get some good stuff done in their communities. And just thank you again. I think this is a great way of actually doing the mahi in the community, because we can spread that dollar much further, but also it's about community development. It's about connecting neighbourhoods up and getting people really enthused and interested, while we can do some of the tough things like taking away weeds and the things we need to be doing in our parks and reserves we need to do. But I think growing this work with the amount of resource we have as a council and DOC and others, I think that this is the way forward of actually getting people involved and and continuing the work. So it's fantastic. It's awesome to see so many funded. But yeah, we will continue looking at how we can improve the process from here. So thank you, everyone. And I would ask for a vote. All in favour of the recommendations here? Anyone against? Perfect. Thank you very much. Have a good day. We will now move on to item 9, which is an update on the Waste Minimisation and Innovation Fund and the funding round. We will get Prue and Samantha to introduce herself, and then we're going to go discuss the report in public, what we can see here, and an explanation of why we need to move into confidential, just in case councillors are unsure. I'll second. And yeah, Prue or Samantha.
So Sam will introduce herself.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Samantha Arumugam Toku Ingawa. I'm the Waste Planning Advisor for Initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll not go through the presentation now. So I'll just give a bit of a history in terms of the grant scheme for the new members. So we set the grant up in 2013. So this was part of the first waste plan that council had, and it's been going since then. The key difference here is this grant is funded through the waste levy. So it is not funded through the targeted rate or from the rates. And this was set up to fund typically seed fund projects that would work towards waste minimization and help people who may not otherwise have accessibility to funding, because the government also has a waste minimization fund, but sometimes it's hard to get money from that pool. The reason why the actual discussion isn't confidential is because we do get quite a few applications from the private sector or actual companies, and they do have ideas that they don't want to be in the public because they are probably in the initial stages and could have commercial implications. We also have applications from the community sector that may have a similar impact because they are thinking of ideas which could be competing with others, hence the reason that we actually talk to you in terms of what those ideas are in confidential. The other thing is the grant is $500,000 a year, and you might see that sometimes it changes in terms of what quantum we have. So if we are not able to find the right projects in a particular year, we do not give the money out, and it actually rolls over for the next financial year. Or it could happen that we have allocated funding to a project which may not take off or has requested less funding during the term of the project. So that's the reason for why you might see a difference in the quantum of the money that's available in a particular year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So are there any questions on the open report and why we need to move to confidential, or any other questions? Cool. Thank you. So we've got it on our screen. Basically, we're just moving the information and noting the allocation. So all in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Cool. Thank you. Now we'll just move to consideration of the procedural motion to exclude the public. Item 11, I'll move. Deputy Chair Coombe, I saw first. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. So we'll just have a minute or two to move into confidential. Ask any members of the public to leave.